I was asking the Holy Spirit to show me what was going to happen in the time of the end to the younger generation. He took me immediately to Isaiah chapter 40, verses 28 through 31. Isaiah 40, 28 through 31. And I want to read this to you. Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard, that the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is he weary. There's no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint. To them that have no might, he increaseth strength. Now listen to this verse. This is a prophecy. Even the youths shall faint and be weary. The young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. Most of you know, if you watch our program or you've heard us preach, I love Hebrew word studies. The word youth used here is the Hebrew word na'ar, and it means an infant to an adolescence. In the King James Bible, it'll be found in the word boy, child, damsel, or young man. Then it says young men will have a problem. The youth and the young men. In Hebrew, it's youth of a mature age. That takes you from the late teens into the single young adult. We would say today the college and career. So he's actually saying here, from the time that they're very young, all the way into their teens, to the time of the college and career. I'm going to paraphrase this in Stone's unauthorized version, you understand. It's saying that you're going to have a problem of becoming weary to the point of wanting to faint. The word fall is very interesting. I want you to look at this Hebrew word fall. The young men shall faint, the youth shall faint, young men shall utterly fall. The Hebrew word is kashal, and it means this: to stagger, to waver, to get a weakness in the knees, to cause a person to totally stumble. Wow. Why do they stumble? Here's the answer: because they have become weak and fainting in their minds and in their spirits. I brought him because I want to get you an idea. This is an example of the size of an average eagle that was copied after that. This is my mother's favorite story. My mother's 76 years of age, I think. Pretty bad, I don't even know. She had a birthday yesterday, and I asked her how old she was, and she said 25, so she wanted to tell me how old she is now. My mother loves this story, and it's a true story, related by a Baptist minister that it actually happened to. And I want you to follow me very carefully, because this story always touches me. I've told it since I was a kid. Many years ago, a Baptist minister was preaching in the Carolinas, and he preached a 3-part series on eagles. There was a Cherokee Indian who was in the service, and after the 3rd service said, "Preacher, you know more about eagles than any white man I ever met in my life." He said, "I'm amazed," but he said, "You missed something." He said, have you ever, do you know anything about the molting period? Some call it moping, but the molting period of an eagle. He said, "Well, you know, I've heard of it." He said, "Have you ever seen them go through it?" He said, "No, of course not." He said, "Would you like to go see?" He said, "Are you serious?" He said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I'm from the Smokies, down here at the edge of the Smokies." And he said, "Been raised, born here. I know the hills quite well." But he says, "I want to show you something you'll never forget." So the Indian told him, said, "Early in the morning, we got to get there early. I want you to go with me." So early in the morning, he picked up the evangelist. He took him down to the Smoky Mountains, and they stopped at a certain area, and they had to walk the rest of the way down. Couldn't drive. And they went way down into the wilderness of the Smoky Mountains. And they got to the bottom of the mountain, and there was a huge opening. And he said, "I want you to look," and there were 27 crosses, little crosses. And he said, "What in the world is this?" He said, "This is an eagle graveyard." He said, "These are eagles that went through their molting period but never made it out." And he said, "I've buried each one of them here." He said, "But let me show you what's really going to interest you." So they left there and went around another area, another open area. This area had rocks, trees that had fallen. And there were 5 eagles, and their claws, you could tell there was, down in their legs, there was dried blood. There was a calcium buildup in their beak. They were very weak. And they would just stand there with their head hanging over. He said to the Indian, what is this about? He said, preacher, I'm going to make it plain. An eagle was never intended to walk on the ground like a turkey or a chicken. An eagle was always meant to fly. And it's the kind of bird that can fly higher than any other bird. And he told the story, the eyesight can see this, that, and the other. Strength in its beak, strength in its claws. But it said, here's what happened to these birds. One day, they saw this spot and wanted to know what it would be like to no longer fly high, but to walk on the earth like all other birds. And when they got down here, they stayed here too long. And they got to walking and their claws got sore, not realizing that the more they would walk, the sore they would get. Calcium built up on their beak. It's made their head real heavy. And they haven't eaten in so long that they've lost their strength. He said, are they all going to die? He said, that's why I brought you here. But he said, now we got to leave here or it won't happen. So what won't happen? He said, just follow me. They go up into a cliff and he's got binoculars with him. He says, now wait just a minute, but watch in this direction. And all of a sudden, way over those mountains, he starts seeing birds. And they were eagles. And they come in that direction. They start coming. And they got something in their claws. And there's 8 of them. Count them. And they come closer. And they fly and they come closer. And pretty soon, they are over the wilderness where those 5 birds are. And they start circling, and they start dropping lower. And they start dropping what's in their claws, which is squirrel, rabbit, meat that they had caught for those birds that couldn't eat. And as they start dropping the meat, they would scream, "Ah!" And they drop it, another would scream. And they looked down there with their binoculars and saw that 3 of those birds were reaching down there, grabbing that, chewing on it. And, 2 of them were, and 3 of them weren't. He said, let me ask you something. He said to the Indian, how do these birds know to do this? How do they know these birds are here? And he said, preacher, I've lived here all my life. I've named all these birds. I know them by sight. These birds were one time here. And they remember the time when a fella eagle killed food for it because it couldn't eat and screamed at it to get out of the wilderness. He said, what's going to happen? He said, it's going to take a couple of days. He said, you gotta bring me back here. So days went by, and finally he gets a call, and the Indian says, we can go back now. First thing they do, same procedure. They go, there's 30 crosses. He said, so I'm assuming 3 of them didn't make it. He said, preacher, the 3 that did not eat what was given to them died in the wilderness. And he said, but the other 2. He said, let's go up on a rock and we'll show you. Big binoculars. He said, preacher, I want you to look at that cliff. He said, now wait a minute. He said, there's eagles. I know there's eagles out here. How do you know that those eagles, he said, preacher, I've told you, I've been born here. I know this. He said, what you got to understand is an eagle never leaves the rock where it's born. So if it comes down here, it will always go back to the same cliff of the rock where it was born. And he looked, and sure enough, an eagle stepped on that ledge. There was no calcium built up. And it got to flapping its wings. He said, I don't understand. How did it get back up there? He said, the food. The food gave it nourishment, gave it strength. It went back to the rock, and it beat its head against that rock till the hardness came off of its mouth, its beak. And its feathers are being renewed. Its strength is being renewed. And here's the part that amazed me when I heard it. Every eagle has a covering over its eye, so when it flies, the wind doesn't go directly in its eye, otherwise it couldn't see. It's almost like a lens, a contact lens, but it's natural. When the eagle is in the wilderness, it quits crying. The water of the eyes dries up. And one of the first ways that an eagle knows it's been renewed again is when they looked up and that eagle was starting to flap its wings. There was water coming out of the eye down over the beak. And the Indian said, preacher, they're just like people. When Christians who are supposed to be soaring with high places, sitting in heavenly places, lower themselves down to the world, and they walk with common people who don't know God, it causes buildups in their system. It causes weaknesses in their spirit. They can't cry. They feel nothing. They feel no presence of God. But he said, you got to understand, it takes people who've been there to grab them and say, I'm not letting you go back on God. I'm not letting you backslide. I'm not letting you lose out with my youth group. I'm not letting you go back in the world. Do you hear me? But I don't care how you feel. Somebody get me a Bible. You sit there while I read to you a little bit. But I don't feel like eating. I don't care. I'm going to read to you. Somebody get me a gospel tape of some praise and worship. I don't care if you don't want to listen to it. You're going to listen to it. And you keep on pressing. And you always know that you listen to me. This is so true. You always know when that eagle who's fallen gets back on that rock, because you'll watch tears one more time. And all of a sudden, the wings got to flapping. And he hit the wind and started soaring. And he said that Indian went crazy and said, you know what he's doing now, preacher? He's shouting the victory. He's been to the low place, and God's brought him back out of the low place and put him back where he ought to be. I'm trying to say to you, don't you let the devil disappoint you, making you give up and make you quit. You might have to be in the wilderness sometime, but you got enough friends and enough people around you to grab